I, Caedon, Alpha of Ironspire, reject you. 300 wolves heard it. Every lord in the great hall heard it. The stone walls heard it. The torches heard it. The cold winter air pressing in through the shutters heard it. And the girl kneeling on the dais floor, silver-eyed, rough linen dressed, shaking from the force of a bond being torn from her chest, she heard it loudest of all. She did not scream. She did not beg. She pressed one hand flat against a stone, found her feet, and walked out of the hall with the quiet dignity of someone who had been expecting precisely this, and had decided, long before tonight, that she would not give him the satisfaction of watching her break. The crowd murmured. A wolf lord from the east raised his cup and said something cutting. Caedon sat back down, reached for his wine, and told himself he felt nothing. He was, at this point in the story, spectacularly wrong about several things. He was wrong that she was nobody. He was wrong that she was powerless. And he was profoundly, catastrophically wrong to believe that rejecting her was the end of it. Because the girl he sent away that night walked into the forest beyond the walls of his fortress, and the trees bowed as she passed. The wind stopped. The moon, vast and silver and hanging low like something leaning in to listen, blazed. And from the deepest silence of the Ironspire woods, from the place between heartbeats where old things live, a voice that was not made of sound moved through the dark and said, "You have played the mortal long enough, my daughter. Let him come to you now." 3 days later, Ironspire's well ran dry. The kitchen fires refused to catch. 300 wolves woke from the same dream, a silver light at the edge of a forest, walking away, and none of them could explain the cold weight they carried through morning. On the 4th night, the moon rose blood red, and Caedon, the most powerful alpha in the known territories, stood at the window of his great fortress and understood, with the particular clarity of a man who has just made the worst mistake of his life, that the kitchen girl he had rejected in front of the world was not a kitchen girl at all. She was the one who made the moon, and she was waiting to see what he would do next. This is that story. Chapter 1. 6 months before that night in the Great Hall, Nessa arrived at Ironspire the way most unimportant things arrive, quietly, carried in by necessity, noticed by no one in particular. She came with a group of displaced villagers from the border territories, people whose homes had been swallowed by the war between the eastern packs. She was young, early 20s by the look of her, and she had silver eyes, which was unusual, but no one thought much of it because silver-eyed wolves were rare but not unheard of, and Nessa was so thoroughly, almost determinately ordinary in every other respect that the eyes seemed more like a mistake of biology than a sign of anything significant. She was given a place in the kitchens. She worked hard. She did not complain. She was, by all accounts, the sort of person who moved through rooms without disturbing the air in them. The head cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Berta, who had been running the Ironspire kitchens for 30 years, watched Nessa for 3 days before pronouncing her verdict. "She's odd," Berta said, to no one in particular, as Nessa quietly and efficiently dismantled a set of hanging herbs and reorganized them by drying stage without being asked. "Not that odd. Just odd." Nessa turned and smiled at her, and Berta felt, for just a moment, like she was standing in a shaft of sunlight indoors. "Thank you," Nessa said simply. "I'll take odd." She had a way about her. Not striking, not commanding, nothing that would make an alpha look twice. But the wolves near her were calmer. Arguments in the kitchen, which were frequent, loud, and occasionally involved thrown ladles, died down when Nessa walked in. Dogs who had never been tamed would lie at her feet. The moon, several of the kitchen staff noticed, always seemed especially bright on Nessa's side of the yard when she went out to fetch water in the evenings. No one mentioned this to the alpha. Why would they? Caedon had better things to think about than the moods of his kitchen staff. He had a war to prevent. 4 wolf lords were descending on Ironspire for the Summit of Pax, a gathering held once a decade where territories were redrawn, alliances were forged in the usual currency of threat and marriage, and dominance was established through a careful combination of politics, performance, and the occasional bare-knuckled fight in the eastern courtyard after the wine had been flowing for too long. Caedon needed to come out of this summit stronger than he entered it, which meant he needed to appear unassailable in power, in judgment, in control. An alpha without vulnerability was an alpha without enemies. He was 30 years old, built like he had been carved from the same stone as his fortress, with dark eyes that had the quality of deep water, still on the surface, everything underneath moving fast. His beta, a man named Oren who had the unfortunate gift of honesty, described him once as the least fun person in any room he enters, which is impressive given how often he enters rooms. "I have heard worse critiques," Caedon had replied. "I was being diplomatic," Oren had said. Caedon had a plan for the summit. Demonstrate strength. Control the narrative. Sign the Eastern Alliance. Refuse the Western one. The terms were insulting. Hold the northern border without concession. Come home with Ironspire's position secured for another decade. What he did not have a plan for was walking past the kitchen courtyard on his way to the armory 3 days before the summit began and catching, quite without warning, the scent. It stopped him dead. Not perfume. Not the smell of fire or food or the 100 familiar scents of his own territory. Something else entirely. Something that made every single one of his instincts go very, very quiet and then all screaming at once. He turned. The kitchen girl was crossing the yard with a basket of grain, head down, paying him no attention whatsoever, silver hair catching the morning light like the edge of something sharp. Caedon stood absolutely still. He knew what this was. Every wolf-born knew what this was, the way they knew how to shift, the way they knew how to howl. The mate bond. The one the moon goddess laid into the blood before birth. The invisible thread between two souls that was supposed to be the greatest gift and the most terrifying responsibility a wolf could receive. He stood there for a count of 7 heartbeats. Then he turned around and walked away. Not now, he told himself. Not her. Not a kitchen girl with no family, no name, no standing, in the middle of the most critical political week of his reign. He needed strength, not sentiment. He needed alliance, not distraction. He did not speak of it to anyone, not even Oren, who noticed his alpha was slightly strange for the rest of that day, but wisely chose not to comment. What Caedon did not know, what he could not have known because no one had thought to tell him, and because Nessa had spent months being carefully, deliberately invisible, was that she knew about the bond too. She had felt it even before he did. She sat in the kitchen that evening, shelling beans with Berta's youngest apprentice, and she thought about the alpha who had walked past her yard that morning and looked at her for exactly 7 heartbeats before turning away, and she said nothing, and her silver eyes were very, very calm. She had known this was coming. She had known it for a long time. She had, in fact, been waiting for it. Chapter 2. The Wolf Lords arrived on a Thursday, which in the medieval reckoning of Pact territories was a day considered neutral, neither auspicious nor cursed, which was the diplomatic equivalent of a firm handshake and a raised eyebrow. Lord Edvard of the Thornwall Pack arrived first, with 40 riders and a gift of 3 war horses that were clearly too fine to be a peace gesture and too fine not to be a veiled insult to anyone who couldn't afford to match them. Lady Sorrel of Dunmere came second, alone except for her personal guard of 6 wolves and a reputation that preceded her like a weather system. She was 60 years old, had outlived 4 alphas who had tried to absorb her territory, and had the particular manner of someone who had simply run out of patience for nonsense several decades ago. She looked at Ironspire's great hall, looked at Caedon standing at the gate to receive her, and said, without preamble, You're taller than your father. I liked your father. The jury is still out on you. An honor to meet you as well, my lady, Caedon said, with the perfectly calibrated warmth of someone who had been politically raised from birth. Sorrel gave him a look that suggested she knew exactly what he was doing and had not yet decided whether to respect it. The other lords came by evening, brutish Harlan of the Fenmere Marshes, who smelled of river water and old iron, and young Lord Theo of the Ashgate border territories, who was 24, rakishly handsome, and deeply aware of both facts. Theo noticed Nessa on her second evening serving in the Great Hall. He noticed her the way young men with too much confidence and not enough wisdom notice things, loudly, publicly, and without consulting anyone about whether this was a good idea. You there, he said, catching her arm as she passed with a tray of cups. What's your name? Nessa, she said, meeting his eyes with a directness that made him blink. Kitchen servants, in his experience, tended to look at floors. And your family name, he asked. Just Nessa, she said. He smiled at her. It was a practiced smile, the sort that had opened a significant number of doors in his 24 years. Nessa looked at the smile the way a woman who has seen a great deal of weather looks at a light drizzle, and said politely, Your cup, my lord, and set it down in front of him and walked on. At the high table, Caedon, who had watched this exchange without meaning to, took a long drink of wine. She's interesting, Oren said quietly beside him. Who? Said Caedon. Oren, who had been Caedon's beta for 8 years and knew precisely what his alpha's jaw did when he was pretending not to look at something, said nothing further and enjoyed his meal. The summit negotiations began the next morning and were, as all such things were, a masterclass in barely concealed hostility wrapped in formal language and wine. Edvard wanted the Eastern River territories. He presented this desire through 2 hours of historical documentation, genealogical evidence, and the measured confidence of a man who has prepared extensively for an argument he expects to win. Caedon listened to all of it, waited for the room to fall silent, and said, No. Edvard stared at him. Is that your complete position? Edvard asked. I can add not now, not ever, and please don't ask again if that's more complete, Caedon said pleasantly. Lady Sorrel made a sound that might, in a different woman, have been a laugh. The negotiations continued. Harlan wanted border adjustments that would give Fenmere access to the northern trade roads. Theo wanted a marriage alliance. He proposed this with the ease of someone offering to share dessert and seemed genuinely puzzled when Caedon declined without apparent consideration. You don't have a mate, Theo pointed out. My sister is considered quite. Thank you, Caedon said. Theo waited. That was the end of my response, Caedon said. Theo sat back. He was quiet for a moment, and then, with the particular curiosity of someone who has noticed a thing that doesn't quite add up, he said, What are you waiting for, Vrel? A better offer, Caedon said and moved to the next item on the agenda. That night, the hall was loud and full and warm with firelight, and Nessa moved through it like water through a crowd, refilling cups, keeping things smooth, doing the invisible work that keeps great events from collapsing into disorder. She passed close to the high table once, and Caedon, without meaning to, turned and looked at her. She looked back. For a moment 3, 4, 5 heartbeats. No one else in the room seemed to matter very much. Then Edvard said something sharply political at Caedon's elbow, and the moment broke, and Nessa walked on, and Caedon turned back to his guests and the weight of his crown, and told himself, again, that this was not the time. He was running out of time to tell himself that. Chapter 3. The trouble, when it came through Edvard. It was Oren who brought Caedon the information, 2 days into the summit, at the kind of hour when honest news is delivered, past midnight, while the rest of the hall slept, over a dying fire. There are whispers, Oren said carefully. He was a careful man by nature, precise in the way of someone who had learned that careless words in wolf politics cost more than careless swords. "There are always whispers," Caedon said. "These ones have teeth," Oren said. "Edvard has been meeting privately with Harlan. The word among the servants is that they've offered each other a deal. Eastern River access in exchange for Northern road rights. That cuts you out of both." Caedon was quiet for a moment. "And Theo?" "Approached, apparently." He declined. Oren paused. "I think young Theo has, perhaps surprisingly, more loyalty than I credited him." "Or more sense," Caedon said. "If they're moving against me, being the one lord not in the coalition makes you useful to both sides." He stood, moved to the window, looked out over the dark courtyard below. "Where did this information come from?" Oren hesitated slightly longer than Caedon liked. "The kitchen girl," Oren said. "Nessa. She overheard a conversation in the East Corridor and brought it to me." He paused again. "She said she didn't want to cause trouble. She just thought you should know." Something moved through Caedon's chest that he refused to name. "Did she?" he said. "She was very matter-of-fact about it," Oren said. "Like someone reporting a weather change. Here's information that may be useful. I'll go back to the kitchens now." Caedon said nothing. "She didn't ask for anything," Oren added. "No reward, no recognition. She just—" He stopped, seemed to consider his next word carefully, then chose the honest one. "She just seems to care about this place. And the people in it." Caedon stared at the dark courtyard for a long time. "Thank you, Oren," he said at last. "I'll deal with Edvard tomorrow." Oren left. Caedon stayed at the window. Below, in the silver moonlight of the courtyard, a slender figure moved quietly across the stones. A kitchen girl with a water pail and silver hair and the easiest bearing he had ever seen in a person who had nothing. She didn't look up. He almost called out. He did not. He gripped the stone windowsill instead, and the stone was cold and hard and real, and he reminded himself what he was and what he needed, and why none of this could matter. Edvard's coalition fell apart the next morning before he could even attempt to implement it. Caedon arrived at the negotiating table with documentation so precise, delivered with such unhurried calm, that Edvard sat through 15 minutes of it before understanding he had been comprehensively outmaneuvered before breakfast. "How did you know?" Edvard demanded, when the performance of politeness had finally exhausted itself. "People in Ironspire look after Ironspire," Caedon said simply. "It's a feature of the territory." Before we continue, I'll like you to let me know in the comment section where you are currently watching this story from. Also, do not forget to like and hit the subscribe button for more interesting werewolf romance stories. Chapter 4. It was Theo, of all people, who forced the moment. He was not malicious about it. Malice, in Theo, was too sophisticated an emotion. He was simply observant in the way of young people who have grown up watching the political world like a game they are still learning the rules of, and he had noticed several things over the course of the summit that didn't quite add up. He had noticed the way Caedon's attention snagged, just slightly, whenever Nessa was in the hall. He had noticed the way she moved through the room as if she knew where everyone was without looking. He had noticed he was a wolf lord after all, and wolf lords learn to read such things young. The faint, warm, ancient scent of a mate bond that occasionally surfaced around the two of them when the air was right. He was not, to his credit, intending to weaponize it. He had simply, after rather too much wine on the final evening of the summit, decided to be curious about it out loud. "That girl," he said, nodding toward Nessa as she crossed the far end of the hall. "She's your fated mate, isn't she?" He said it at the high table. The room had a particular quality of acoustics, especially in the late evening quiet between toasts, and words at the high table carried. Several heads turned. Nessa, who had not been meant to hear it, clearly did. She went very still at the far end of the room. Caedon felt the entire room watching him. He felt the weight of the summit, of the alliances hanging by threads, of the perception of strength he had spent 3 weeks building. He felt Lord Edvard's attention like a knife point at the back of his neck, patient and evaluating, waiting to see if there was a crack. He thought about his father, who had made a political marriage and ruled wisely and well. He thought about the Pax who would see a kitchen girl of no name and no standing as a weakness dressed as destiny. He made his choice. He stood. "Bring her forward," he said. His voice carried the way alpha voices do, not loud, but absolute. The command of a person who has never had to say anything twice. The hall fell silent. Nessa turned around. Their eyes met across the length of the room, and she walked toward the dais without hurrying, without flinching, with the same steady calm she had carried everywhere, and she stopped at the foot of the steps and looked up at him. Her silver eyes were very clear. She already knew. He could see it. She had known this moment was coming too, the same way she had known everything, with a stillness that ought to have frightened him and instead made him angrier at himself than he had been in years. Caedon Vrell, Alpha of Ironspire," he said, and his voice did not waver, because he was very, very good at the things he chose to do. "Reject you as my fated mate. The bond between us is broken. So let it be witnessed." It hit her. He saw it. The briefest contraction in her chest, the slight tightening of her jaw, the way the silver light in her eyes flickered, just once, like a flame in wind. The mate bond didn't break clean. It never did. It tore. She stood through it. She took a breath. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and he could not read her expression, which was somehow the worst part. He expected grief. He expected anger. He expected the helpless fury of someone who has been told by the most powerful person in their world that they are not enough. What she gave him was something he had no word for. "All right," she said. 2 words. Quiet as snow. She turned and walked out of his hall, and the crowd let her pass, and the great doors closed behind her, and the room buzzed back to life with the particular energy of people who have just witnessed something they will be talking about for years. Caedon sat back down. He reached for his wine. Oren, beside him, said absolutely nothing, which was the loudest thing anyone said to him that night. Theo, to his credit, looked like he was considering never speaking again. "I didn't mean for." "It's fine," Caedon said. He said it in the tone that people use when things are very much not fine, but they have decided to stop anyone else from trying to address that fact. He finished the summit. He signed the necessary agreements. He showed out his guests the next morning with the proper forms of honor. He maintained, perfectly, the appearance of a man who had made a rational political calculation and felt good about it. He was extremely good at appearances. He did not sleep that night at all. Chapter 5. The forest beyond Ironspire's walls was old. Older than the pack, older than the fortress, older than any name that wolves had given to the territory. Its trees were enormous and dark and patient, the way old things are patient, not passive, but unrushed. They had seen empires born and gone. A wolf lord's politics was a small weather system to them. Nessa walked into the forest without a lantern. She did not need one. She never had. She walked for a long time, long enough that the sounds of the fortress faded completely, and there was only the sound of her feet on old roots and the movement of the wind in branches that seemed, if you were paying attention, to part slightly as she passed, the way a crowd might part for someone they recognized. She stopped in a clearing so deep in the forest that the moonlight fell in a perfect column, clean and silver and straight as judgment. She was crying. Just a little. Just enough. She was allowed that much. The mate bond had hurt. She had known it would. She had agreed to this, had agreed to the wound, had agreed to the vulnerability, had agreed to take on the form and feeling of a mortal girl and know the full force of mortal rejection, because that was the point. Because she wanted to understand what she asked of wolves when she wove these bonds into their blood. Understanding, she had found, was frequently inconvenient. She sat down on a root, wiped her face, and looked up at the moon, which was, technically, herself, which made the situation somewhat philosophically complicated. "I know," she said, to the silver sky. The light shifted. The column of moonlight warmed, changed quality, became something less like illumination and more like presence. "He'll come to you," the light said. It was not a sound exactly. It was more like remembering a sound that had always been there. They always do, when they understand what they've lost. "He might not," Nessa said. "He's very stubborn." "He's yours," the light said. "The stubborn ones are always the most interesting." Nessa made a sound that was mostly a laugh and slightly a sob. "That is not as comforting as you think it is." The presence was warm and vast and unhurried. "You could end this tonight," it said. "Show them what you are. Make him understand by force." "No," Nessa said. "No," the presence agreed, gently. That was never the point. The moonlight shifted again and became just light, just the ordinary silver beauty of a night sky doing what night skies do. Nessa sat in it for a while longer, until the chill of the roots and the soil became more insistent than she was comfortable ignoring. Then she stood, and something happened that no mortal eye was present to witness. The ordinariness fell away from her. Not dramatically, not in light and thunder as old stories like to depict such things, but quietly, like a coat being shed, like a breath being released after being held too long. For just a moment, in the column of silver light, what stood in the forest was not a kitchen girl from the border territories. What stood there was ancient and radiant and absolutely certain of itself, with eyes like poured moonlight and the quality of someone for whom time was not a constraint, but a medium. Then she breathed in, and the ordinariness settled back, and Nessa was Nessa again. She walked back toward the edge of the forest. She had work to do. Chapter 6. For 3 days after the summit, Ironspire functioned exactly as it always had. Then things started going wrong. It began small. The wolves who had been patrolling the northern border came back unsettled, reporting that their animals, the pack's shifted wolves, the most reliable fighters in the territory, had refused to run their usual routes. They had stopped at the tree line, raised their heads, and looked north with an expression that the patrol leader described as listening to something we couldn't hear. Then the kitchen fires went out. All of them, simultaneously, at 4 in the afternoon on a still day with no wind. Then the well in the central courtyard, which had never run dry in 200 years of Ironspire's history, came up empty. Caedon stood at the edge of the well and looked down into the darkness at the bottom of it and felt, for the first time in a long time, something that bore a significant resemblance to dread. "It's not natural," Oren said, standing beside him with the expression of a man who is choosing his words with surgical precision. "The well is fed by a spring. Springs don't go dry in the middle of summer." "I know that," Caedon said. "I'm just confirming that we both know it," Oren said, "so that neither of us suggests otherwise." "Is there more?" Caedon asked. Oren hesitated. "The wolves are having the same dreams," he said. "Different wolves, the same dream, which is a silver light at the edge of a forest, walking away." Caedon was quiet for a very long time. "And Nessa," he said finally, "where is she?" "Still in the kitchens," Oren said. "Still working. She hasn't said a word about any of this. Berta says she acts like nothing happened." Caedon turned away from the empty well. "She's still here." "Yes," Oren said. "After what I did," Caedon said, "in front of everyone. She's still here. Yes, Oren said again. Something in Caedon's chest, which had been sealed shut and armored and told firmly not to make a fuss for 3 days, broke open very quietly. He did not say what he was thinking, but Oren, who had been his beta for 8 years, watched the set of his jaw change, watched the careful political armor of his expression crack just slightly along one seam, and understood. "I'll be in the study," Caedon said. "If anyone needs me." He went to the study, and he sat there for 4 hours, and he did not read any of the documents on his desk, and he did not send for anyone, and he did not pretend, in the privacy of that room, to feel nothing at all. On the 4th day, the moon rose blood red. Every wolf in Ironspire felt it, a pull, ancient and bone-deep, the way the tide feels a pull that isn't really the tide's choice. They gathered in the courtyard without being summoned, stood in the red moonlight with their faces turned upward, and none of them spoke, because what they were feeling had no adequate words in any language wolves had ever made. Caedon stood at his window and watched them. He was the alpha. He was supposed to have answers. He was supposed to be the one standing in front of his people saying, "This is what's happening, and this is what we do about it." He had no answers. He thought about silver eyes and a quiet voice saying, "All right," and then walking away. He thought about the well with no water, and the fires that wouldn't light, and 300 wolves dreaming the same dream. He thought about the mate bond, the one he had severed, the one he had called a liability, the one that had felt, in the 7 heartbeats before he chose to look away, like the first genuinely true thing he had ever felt. He went to find Nessa. Chapter 7. She was in the kitchen garden, which was a small, walled enclosure on the south side of the fortress, where Berta grew the herbs and vegetables that supplemented the pack stores. It was late evening, and the red moon cast everything in the color of dying fire. Nessa was sitting on a low stone wall, not doing anything in particular, just sitting, in the moonlight, with her hands folded in her lap and her silver eyes on the sky above. Caedon stopped at the garden gate. She did not look at him, but she said, "I wondered when you'd come." He was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed open the gate and walked into the garden and stood a few feet away from her, because he was suddenly completely unsure of what to do with himself, which was a feeling he had not had since he was approximately 14 years old, and had not enjoyed then either. "The well," he said. "Yes," she said. "The fires." "Yes." "The dreams." "Yes." He was quiet. Then, the moon. She looked at him for the first time. Her expression was patient and ancient, and entirely unlike that of a kitchen girl who had been rejected in front of 300 people 4 days ago. "Yes," she said. Caedon sat down on the wall beside her. Not close, not touching. There was still enough caution in him for that, but close enough that the silver light falling over her fell partly over him too. "Who are you?" he said. It was not really a question. It was more like a man saying something aloud that he had already understood, to hear how it sounded outside his own head. Nessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you already know." "Tell me anyway," he said. She looked at the moon for a long moment. "I am called by many names," she said quietly. "Your people know me as Lenara. Some call me the Silverborn. The oldest texts, the ones written in the first language before your pack had a fortress or a name, call me what I am." She paused. "I am the moon goddess." Silence. "The moon goddess," Caedon said. "Yes." "Who has been," he continued carefully, "working in my kitchen?" "For 6 months, yes," she said. "And organizing the herbs by drying stage." A pause. "They were in the wrong order," she said. "It was bothering me." Caedon put his face in his hands. It was not the most alpha thing he had ever done, but it seemed like the most honest. "Why?" he said through his hands. Why would you?" "Because I weave these bonds," she said, and her voice had changed quality, still gentle, but underneath it now was something that vibrated like the lowest note of a very large instrument, something that made the air feel different. I lay them into you before you're born. I choose who belongs to whom, and I spend millennia watching wolves suffer because of what I've decided for them, and I have never once felt what it is to have the person you were made for look at you and choose away from you.
She paused.
I wanted to know. Caedon lowered his hands. He looked at her. You chose to feel it, he said. You chose to come here, as a mortal, to feel a rejection. Among other things, she said. Among other, he stopped. What other things? She was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, you, she said. I wanted to know you. Another silence. A different kind this time. You knew who I was, Caedon said. Before the bond. You knew I was your fated. I chose you, she said. I laid the bond myself. I chose you, and then I came to see what I had chosen, and yes. I stayed longer than I planned to, because of what I found. Caedon stared at the red moon for a long time. I rejected you, he said. There was nothing political in his voice anymore. Nothing strategic or careful or managed. Just a man sitting with the naked weight of what he had done. In front of everyone. I looked at you, and I chose my reputation over the only true thing I'd felt in years, and he stopped. I am not going to pretend that was a forgivable thing to do. I didn't say it was, Nessa said, but her voice was gentle. No, he said. You just said all right and walked away. I was giving you time to catch up, she said. He looked at her. She was looking at him, and in the red moonlight her silver eyes were steady and old and somehow, despite everything she was, entirely earnest. That's not the angry response of a goddess, he said. No, she agreed. The angry response dried up your well. The patient response is sitting here talking to you. She tilted her head slightly. I've been alive for a very long time, Caedon. I have learned to choose my responses carefully. He almost smiled. Almost. Is that a warning? It's context, she said. Chapter 8. Word spread through Ironspire the way word always spreads in places where people live in close quarters and share walls and dreams. Fast, quietly, with a quality of inevitability, as though the information had been waiting in the stone and merely needed the right moment to surface. By morning, every wolf in the territory knew something had happened in the kitchen garden the night before. They did not know the specifics. They knew the moon had changed color, and their alpha had gone out alone and come back changed in some way that was hard to name but unmistakable to wolves, who were, by nature, readers of such things. Oren found Caedon in the great hall at dawn, sitting at the head of the empty table, staring at the cold hearth with the expression of a man who has done several years of reckoning in a single night. She's the moon goddess, Oren said. He said it the way a person states a thing they have spent the night processing and have finally, exhaustedly accepted. Yes, Caedon said. And she was in our kitchen. Yes. Organizing herbs. Apparently they were in the wrong order, Caedon said. Oren sat down. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in the tone of a man who has been a beta long enough to know when the political consequences of a situation have exceeded his ability to manage them, how bad is this? Caedon looked at him. I rejected the moon goddess in front of 3 packs of witnesses, he said. I would say it is fairly bad. Right, Oren said.
Right.
And the well was a response to the rejection. Yes. And the fires. Oren. Yes. I need to know one thing, Caedon said, before I decide what to do. He looked at the cold hearth for a moment, then back at his beta. When she was here, before, as just Nessa, what did the pack think of her? Oren was quiet. Then, they liked her. Everyone liked her. Berta said she was the best worker she'd had in 20 years. The children used to follow her around the courtyard.
He paused.
The wolves wouldn't fight near her. Did you know that? There are 12 territories in this fortress, where men have been trying to settle old grudges for years. In her 6 months here, not a single fight. People just calmed down when she was near. Caedon's jaw tightened. She was also right about Edvard, Oren said quietly. The information she brought me, if she hadn't brought it, you would have gone into that final day blind. She had no reason to. She owed you nothing. Less than nothing, arguably. He paused. She protected this place, even after she knew what you were going to do to her. Caedon stood up. He moved to the window, looked out at the courtyard where his people were beginning their mourning, a little subdued, a little uncertain, a pack that had been stripped of one of its essential securities and didn't quite have the vocabulary to describe what was missing. I want to call a gathering, he said. Of who? Oren asked. Everyone, Caedon said. Chapter 9. They gathered in the great hall, all 300 of them, filling every surface and shadow of the space where, less than a week before, a king had stood and shamed a girl no one had bothered to look at carefully. Nessa was there. She was standing near the back, with Berta and several of the kitchen staff, dressed exactly as she always was, plain linen, silver hair, silver eyes, the most ordinary extraordinary thing in the room. Caedon stood on the dais. He was not, for once, performing anything. He was just standing there, in his own hall, in front of his own people, and for the first time in his adult political life, he was not planning what to say before he said it. He looked at Nessa. She looked back, steady as always. 5 days ago, he said, I stood here and did something in front of all of you that I told myself was strength. His voice carried the way it always did, not loud, just certain. I was wrong. It was the furthest thing from strength. The hall was very quiet. You deserve to know what is happening in your territory, he continued. Some of you already suspect. The well, the fires, the moon. He paused. The woman I rejected in this hall 5 days ago is Lenara. She is the moon goddess. She came here among us as a mortal, and she lived in our kitchens, and she worked in our yard, and she kept this place calmer than it has been in 10 years, and when she learned that an ally was working to undermine this pack, she came forward with that knowledge not because she owed us anything, but because she is, whatever else she is, someone who looks after the places she loves. Silence. Then murmuring. Then, from somewhere near the back, Berta's unmistakable voice. I knew she was odd. Several people laughed, the slightly unhinged laughter of a crowd that has been holding its breath. Caedon almost smiled. She is my fated mate, he said. Chosen for me before I was born, and I rejected her in front of you all for the sake of what I thought my reputation required.
He stopped.
I would like to undo that. I cannot undo the public wound. But I can tell you the truth of it, in the same place where I caused the harm. He looked at Nessa. She was watching him with those clear silver eyes, and he could not tell, from here, what she was thinking. This is not a political speech, he said. This is an apology to my pack for asking them to witness something shameful and calling it leadership. And to her, he said, and his voice changed quality, quieter, stripped of every performance, just the bare sound of a man who means what he is saying, for thinking that what the world required of me was more important than what she deserved from me. He stepped down from the dais. This was not a thing alphas did at gatherings. Alphas stood at the dais, above the crowd, always. Stepping down was a statement. He walked through the hall. People stepped aside, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Because there is something in the sight of a powerful person choosing vulnerability, choosing truth over performance, that makes space for itself without needing to demand it. He stopped in front of Nessa. Up close, those silver eyes were very, very ancient. I have no argument to make, he said quietly just to her. I have no political case and no tactical position. I have only this. I was afraid, and I was stupid about it, and I caused you pain that I did not have the right to cause, and I am sorry." Nessa looked at him for a long moment. Berta, behind her, was making the face of someone who wants very badly to say something sarcastic and is exercising extraordinary restraint. "Well," Nessa said at last. "I know," Caedon said. "And the fires." "I know. And the moon." "Yes. Those," she said, "were not actually deliberate."
He blinked.
"When a goddess cries," she said, with a dignity that somehow also contained a note of mild exasperation, "the world around her tends to be sympathetic. I didn't intend to drain your well. I was just having a significant feeling near it."
A beat.
"That is," Caedon said carefully, "both the most powerful and most inconvenient thing I have ever heard." The silver eyes crinkled at the corners. "Just slightly. Just enough. I am," she said, "aware of the irony."
Chapter 10.
The well filled that night. No one was in the courtyard to see it happen, but the next morning when the first stable hand went out at dawn, the water was back, cool and clear and running from the spring as if it had never stopped, as if it had simply been waiting for a reason. The kitchen fires lit with a look from Nessa before breakfast. She didn't say anything. She just walked in, glanced at the cold grates, and they caught. Berta watched this happen and then turned back to her bread dough and decided to add this to the long list of things about Nessa that she was choosing not to ask questions about. The moon on the night that followed was silver again, silver and full and close, the way it gets in late summer when the air is clear, when it seems to hang so low that you could, if you tried, reach up and touch it. The wolves felt the shift in their blood. They couldn't have explained it to someone who wasn't a wolf, but there is a particular quality to the world when it is properly ordered, when the bond between the pack and the sky that watches over it is intact, and that quality had been absent for 5 days and was now returned, and every wolf in Ironspire breathed differently that night, and slept deeply, and dreamed of silver light that was not walking away. Caedon and Nessa walked the walls of the fortress together that evening, as the light failed and the stars came out. It was a thing Caedon did most evenings, a habit from childhood, a circuit of his territory that had started as duty and became, over years, the quietest part of his day. He had never done it with anyone before. It had always seemed like the kind of ritual that didn't accommodate company. He discovered, with Nessa beside him, that he had been wrong about that. They talked, not about politics or pack dynamics or the mess that the summit had left in its wake. They talked about small things, the particular shape of the northern hills at dusk, the way the forest changed sound between seasons, the names of the old stars that no one used anymore. "You named those," Caedon said at one point, looking up. "The stars."
"Some of them," she said.
"Some named themselves. Stars are opinionated." "You're saying the stars have opinions. I'm saying everything that has existed long enough eventually develops a perspective," she said. "It's just that most things don't have the vocabulary to express it. Stars at least have light." Caedon was quiet for a moment. "Is that what the bond is?" he said. "Something that existed long enough to develop a perspective." She looked at him sideways. "I thought you'd ask something more prosaic, like whether you're going to have to apologize to the Eastern Lords for the disruption." "That concern is also present," he admitted. "Yes," she said. "The bond is something that has existed long enough. It is older than you and older than this fortress and older than your people's first word for it. It knows what it is. It knows what it wants." "And what does it want?" She was quiet for a moment. They had reached the eastern parapet, and the view from here was the forest stretching to the horizon, dark and enormous and older than everything, and the moon just clearing the treeline, and it was genuinely, almost unbearably beautiful. "The same thing you do," she said. When you stop arguing with yourself about it. He thought about that for a while. Then he said, I was afraid you'd be something I couldn't hold. I know, she said. That is still true, he said. You are the moon. You are not. I am also the woman who reorganized your kitchen herbs, she said. Both things are true. I contain multitudes. A pause and a slight warmth in her voice. Rather literally.
He looked at her for a long time.
She let him look. If I ask, he said, will you stay? You are not asking, she said gently. You're testing whether I'll leave before you ask. Which is very like you, but will not work on me. His jaw tightened in the particular way it did when he knew he'd been accurately read. Will you stay? He said. Ask it like you mean it, she said.
A breath.
Then, from Caedon Vrel of Ironspire, the alpha of the most powerful pack in the known territories, the man who had spent 30 years perfecting the art of wanting nothing publicly.
Please.
Nessa turned to look at him. Yes, she said. Chapter 11. Restoring a rejected mate bond was not, as it turned out, a simple matter. There was a ritual. There was always a ritual in wolf culture for the things that mattered, a formal undoing of the rejection before witnesses, an offering of intent made under open sky, and the reweaving of the bond itself, which could only happen if both parties chose it without reservation. Oren, who had quietly gone and consulted every text in Ironspire's considerable library on the subject, presented Caedon with a summary of the requirements with the expression of a man who has prepared a very thorough report on a situation he sincerely wishes had not occurred. There are 3 parts, Oren said. Of course there are, Caedon said. The first is public acknowledgement of the rejection and a formal statement of reversal. You've essentially already done that. He looked at his notes. You receive credit for that. Generous. The second is an offering presented to the moon, which is, in this particular case, somewhat personally complicated, Caedon said. I was going to say theologically novel, Oren said. But yes. Caedon had gone to Nessa with this problem. She had listened, and then she had been very quiet for a moment, and then she had said, with a control that did not entirely conceal her amusement, You need to make an offering to me. While I am standing in front of you. Yes, Caedon said. And this needs to be done at the great altar in the north courtyard, in front of your pack. Yes. She pressed her lips together very firmly. All right, she said. I can manage the theological dimensions of that. Are you laughing? He said. Absolutely not, she said. You are absolutely laughing. Caedon, she said with immense dignity, I am an ancient divine being. I do not laugh at the sacred rituals of the people I created. A pause. I am experiencing a profound and solemn appreciation for the irony of my situation. The ritual was held on the night of the full moon, 3 days later. Every wolf of Ironspire was present. Word had spread. Word of this kind always spread, and there were wolves in the crowd from the border territories and 2 other packs who had apparently sent representatives on the quietly understood basis that this was a thing that happened once in a long history and one ought to be present to witness it. Caedon stood at the altar. He had rejected the idea of ceremony for most of his adult life. He preferred clean lines, direct action, nothing that required standing in ceremonial dress while 300 people watched him manage his own emotions. He stood in ceremonial dress while 300 people watched him manage his emotions. He made his offering, the traditional one, which in Ironspire's custom was wolfsbane woven with silver cord, placed in the altar flame, an offering of something precious given freely, and he made the formal reversal in the words the ritual required. And then he looked at Nessa, who was standing across the altar from him in the silver light that seemed, near her, to have a slightly more active quality than moonlight usually managed, and he said the words the ritual did not require, but that he had chosen to say anyway. I chose wrong. I knew what I was choosing, and I chose the easier thing and the smaller thing, and the thing that cost you instead of me. I am asking you to let me do better. Nessa looked at him across the altar flame. You will certainly have opportunities, she said. Is that a yes? It is a yes, she said, with conditions. Name them, he said. The kitchen remains my territory, she said. Berta and I have a system. A surprised laugh moved through the crowd. The kitchen, he confirmed, is yours. And when you are wrong, she said, you will say so. Not after 3 weeks of being diplomatically difficult about it. Not through an intermediary.
Directly.
To my face. Agreed, he said. And, she said, and her voice dropped slightly, and the silver light shifted, and the crowd, which had been breathing, seemed to hold its breath collectively. You will let me be yours the way I am trying to be yours. Not as a symbol or a strategy or a demonstration of spiritual favor. She looked at him, clear and direct and entirely earnest. As your mate, the person who knows where you are when you've been staring at the courtyard for too long and need someone to tell you to come inside. Caedon looked at her for a long moment. You've been watching me stare at the courtyard, he said. Everyone watches you stare at the courtyard, she said. Oren has a betting pool about what you're thinking. I won the last round. Oren, in the crowd, said nothing, but his expression was that of a man who wishes his financial activities had remained private. Agreed, Caedon said. All of it.
He paused.
To all of it. The bond, when it reformed, was nothing like the first time. The first time, months ago, in the kitchen courtyard, it had been a sunrise. Warm, sudden, overwhelming. This was different. This was the sun that had already been rising, finally clearing the horizon fully, throwing light into every corner of the room it had been waiting to reach, filling everything with a warmth that felt less like arrival and more like coming home. The wolves in the courtyard lifted their faces to the sky. The moon, which had, everyone agreed later, been doing something unusual all evening, blazed. Just for a moment. Just enough. And then it was moonlight again, the ordinary, extraordinary moonlight of a clear summer night, and the flame at the altar was just flame, and Nessa was just Nessa, and Caedon crossed the altar stone in 2 steps and she let him, and he took her hands and she looked up at him with those ancient silver eyes and he said, very quietly, with no audience at all, or rather, with every audience there could possibly be, and not minding a single one of them, I see you. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that contains entire seasons. I know, she said. I've been waiting. In the months that followed, Ironspire changed. Not dramatically. Not in the sweeping, visible way of wars won or territories doubled. It changed the way places change when something that was quietly absent returns, the gradual recovery of warmth in the stones, the subtle easiness in the air, the particular quality of a community that knows, without being able to say exactly how it knows, that it is properly looked after. The well never ran dry again. The kitchen fires lit without complaint. The wolves who had been dreaming of silver light walking away began to dream of silver light coming in through the windows, which Berta said was an improvement and the patrol captain said was making their fighters slightly too content, which was a problem they had never had before and were not entirely sure how to classify. Nessa remained in Ironspire in the way that tides remain in the sea, not always present in the same form, not always in the same place, but never truly absent, always returning, always itself. She kept the kitchen as agreed. Berta had, after a brief period of philosophical recalibration, concluded that working alongside a goddess was either the most humbling or the most validating experience of her career, and had landed, finally, on validated. If she's the moon goddess and she thinks my bread is acceptable, Berta told her apprentice, then my bread is acceptable. That's just mathematics. Oren, who had been present at every significant event of the preceding months and had performed with exceptional professionalism throughout, quietly won his own betting pool by correctly predicting the exact phrasing of Caedon's apology. He collected his winnings without ceremony and bought himself a very good bottle of wine, which he drank alone on a Tuesday evening and considered a well-earned treat. Lord Theo of Ashgate sent a letter. It was unexpectedly thoughtful for a 24-year-old who had inadvertently triggered an interdimensional romantic crisis and contained a genuine apology and an offer of renewed alliance that Caedon accepted on the principle that anyone willing to admit fault was a more interesting diplomatic partner than most. Edvard of Thornwall sent nothing. This was Caedon reflected about what he expected. Lady Sorrel sent a short note that contained 4 words. I told you so. Caedon read it twice, and then laughed, properly, fully, the kind of laugh that surprises the person doing it, and pinned it above his desk. On the evenings when the weather was good, Caedon walked the walls of Ironspire, and Nessa walked beside him, and they talked about the shapes of hills and the names of stars and the particular weight of very old decisions, and what it means to choose the true thing instead of the convenient one. The wolves of Ironspire ran better, lived better, fought less, loved more, and had an entirely unearned reputation among surrounding packs for being the most serene territory in the known world, a quality that several pack leaders tried to replicate through various diplomatic and architectural means and utterly failed to understand was not about any of those things. It was, as Berta could have told them, much simpler than that. It was about having the right person in the kitchen, and the right alpha, finally, to see her.